Greetings, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my take on The Thing, the 2011 prequel to The Thing, the 1982 John Carpenter classic of science fiction horror film. Yes, well, last time we sort of gave a few thoughts and showed the collection and whatnot, and kind of got things rolling, but then had to cut it short because, quite frankly, I rambled just way too much. Well, this is the epic conclusion. Things get a little bit ranty in a few spots, but that's okay. I know most of you guys like that. So beware of spoilers ahead in case you haven't seen both films, because I do talk about both films quite a bit. Alrighty, enough of me. Let's roll the titles and then back to me for more about The Thing. So what is this big thing in The Thing that I have a big thingy problem thing with? The spaceship. And all the events surrounding the spaceship, and the discovery of the spaceship, and the unearthing of the spaceship, which never happens in the... Now, here's the problem, okay? In the original film, the Norwegians discover the spaceship buried in the ice. And they plant thermite charges, basically to blow the ice off of it. In the commentary for this is saying, oh, then they destroyed it with the thermite charges. That they weren't trying to destroy it. They were just trying to unearth it so they could study it. And, well, in the prequel, there is no sign of them using thermite charges. There is no sign of the gigantic crater leading down to the spaceship. No, in the prequel, they discover it in an ice cave. How the fuck did it get into an ice cave? Okay, in the original, it's pretty well established that the ship crashed and just got buried in the ice. It crashed, it couldn't take off again, it just got buried on the ice. The Thing creature crawled out or was thrown out, they don't know. I mean, we'll never know. Unless they do a prequel showing the crash, I guess. But this is just my hand, by the way. I'm not playing with myself, I swear. And that was it. I mean, and it's not just speculated about in the film. They find videos showing the Norwegians doing that. Okay? So we see videotape of the Norwegians planting thermite charges and blowing up the ice to unearth the spaceship. And then they go later to check out the spaceship, and they climb down the crater, and it's not destroyed, it's still there. I mean, it's not functional, but it's there, you know. So in the prequel, they have it in an ice cave, and the spaceship attempts to power up and take off. The Thing gets in there, and it powers it up and attempts to take off, and they blow it up in the ice cave. And that's what makes it non-functional. But I mean, I was always under the impression that it was non-functional after it crashed initially and was buried under the ice for 100,000 years. I mean, that spaceship just does not work anymore. You know, done. It wasn't because the Norwegians blew it up. You know, I don't know. They may have damaged it when they blew off the ice because, I mean, they're not miners, they're scientists. And they're just kind of quickly trying to deal with the situation. But okay, now here's the thing. I wanted answers as to why they did it that way in the prequel and why it wasn't done the way it was done in the original. And according to the director, in the commentary and some of the extras, he decided that it was just too implausible that the Norwegians would have that much thermite. Like, what would it be there for? What would they be using it for? and that they would have that much thermite that they would be able to make a crater of that size, and it just wasn't believable. It's like, okay. You can't change history, okay? That's as far as fans of the original are concerned, that's the way it happened. It already happened. You can't go back and change that. Especially if you're calling yourself a fucking prequel. You do not change that. I mean, that was a major thing. And it wasn't like they'd just taken it from bits and pieces of information and interpreted it that way. No. This is something that we clearly saw in the original. Clearly saw. It was talked about by the characters. They looked at videos of it. They went to the crater. You know, it's a big thing in the original thing. You know, you just can't change that. I don't care what your personal viewpoint is, or if you find it plausible or not. That's the way it happens in the movie. So if you're going to be a prequel, you remain consistent with that firmly established plot point. You know? So that was one thing, that was the big thing that bugged me, and that's why I spent so long talking about it. The other thing that bugged me was just how they sourced certain things and how they changed the sourcing of certain things. One little one was the guy who slits his throat. Slits his wrist, slits his throat. It all matches up very well, except for one thing. And this is mentioned somewhere in the extras. I can't remember specifically where, but it's mentioned somewhere in the extras, was that when the Americans discover the body at the Norwegian camp in the original, the guy's head is tilted back, and it looks like there's a huge chunk of flesh missing. So implying, the way they describe it is like implying that he had dug so deep into his neck that he'd almost decapitated himself, and that's just not plausible. That's not believable. So in the prequel, he cuts his throat in a more realistic fashion, so it's not like this deep thing. Now, I had always interpreted that as, you know, because, I mean, they find the body is frozen solid, and when things freeze, they shrink. So I had always interpreted that as he slit his throat, and then it just separated more as the body froze and the flesh shrunk back. You know, that's how I always looked at it. You know, it's this thing called physics you might have heard of. I don't know. They could have made it a deeper cut. I don't think there was I think it's actually a little bit too shallow in the prequel, but maybe that's just nitpicking. The other thing I had an issue with was actually the sourcing of split face. I think they really didn't get what split face is. To me, I look at the original split face and see if you agree with me on this. Again, open to interpretation, but this is how I interpreted it based on what they talk about in the movie, and when they're dissecting, they actually dissect split face in the movie and talk about what it is and what it is composed of. So in the original, it's basically a thing creature that's kind of halfway through assimilating somebody. So when they're dissecting split face, they're kind of puzzled because internally is what appears to be just a single set of internal organs. That's it. That look like a normal set of internal organs. And Blair, Wilford Brimley's character who's dissecting it, is kind of, you know, scratching his head. It's like, well, this is... And he says this. He says, well, what we have here is what appears to be a perfectly normal set of internal organs. But externally, obviously, this is not just a normal person. There's something else going on here. It isn't until they dissect the dog creature later that they get what's going on, because they see they see like the parts of the original dog and then parts of the imitation dog, and he kind of puts two and two together there. He says, what we have here is an organism that imitates other organisms, and it imitates them perfectly. So then you realize, like, okay, that's what split face was basically something that was partway through the assimilation and imitation process, and it was almost complete because internally it was pretty much done. It It had assimilated whoever it was assimilating internally, like with the internal organs, and it was just finishing up the outside, and then got caught before it could finish. And that's what I always thought split face was basically not two people fusing together, but rather a single assimilation of a thing creature assimilating a person and imitating them, and then it got caught before it could finish. And that whole scene where they're dissecting it in the original supports that theory pretty much perfectly. Like a perfect imitation. It's a perfect supporting of the theory with evidence right there in front of you, explained in dialogue and shown visually in visual form with the visuals. Now, the way that it plays out in the prequel is it's actually two people fusing together. And at first I was kind of excited. I was like, oh, they're sourcing the Two-Face thing. Cool. But then as the scene played out, I was like, that's not really what I envisioned having happened there. Because essentially it partially fuses, so you have the two faces, interlocked together. And then it becomes this creature that is like stalking everybody through the base and chasing people around the base for like 20 minutes. Or at least it feels like 20 minutes. So it's just like running around and just chasing after everybody until finally it crashes out of the window, and they set it on fire and it crashes out the window, and then they go out and finish it off, and it lands where it's discovered in the original rather, and that's just not the way I pictured that creature being created in the first place. I mean, first off, I never thought of it as being two people. I always thought of it as being one person, where half of it was the original and half was the imitation in the process of being made. And I never pictured it as something that was necessarily particularly agile and running around and just killing anybody that got in its path. No, I mean, yeah, see, and this leads us into something else that I know a lot of people had a problem with, and I basically completely agree with. In the original thing, the creature is not very fast moving. It's very slow. It wants to hide. It wants to, it sticks to the shadows. It tries to be stealthy. It's trying to hide and survive. That's the whole purpose of it, is to survive. Whereas in the prequel, it's almost like this feral creature that's just doesn't care about hiding. It's like it'll hide briefly, and then if anybody so much as looks at it sideways, it'll just rip out of the person and then attack anybody in the vicinity. And it's like it doesn't even try to be stealthy at all. It's like just constantly ripping out of its imitations and attacking everybody. And that's just not concurrent with the kind of behavior. Now, one might argue that that's a throwback to the line in the original where he says, he thaws out and wakes up, probably not in the best of moods. And it kind of seems like they latched onto that line and said, like, okay, in our prequel, we're going to have an angry thing that's just attacking everybody. And I just don't see that as being the case. I mean, to me, the thing is intelligent. It's not intelligent in that it can communicate with us person to person. I mean, it'll be an imitation. Oh, sorry, my screen blanket just kicked on. Like, it'll be an imitation, and it'll talk to you as the person that it's imitating, but you wouldn't really be talking to the thing. You would be talking to its imitation of the person that it took over. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like the thing itself acts on instinct rather than consciousness, and that it's almost acts subconsciously and instinctively to survive, but you never really are able to speak to the core creature, as it were. I see some people on the message boards asking, well, how come nobody ever asked what it wanted? It's like, well, what do you need to do? I mean, first off, it can't communicate with us the same way. I mean, who's to say that it's even able to communicate? I mean, it seemed to me that it's just purely an instinctive creature that is just out to survive, and that's it. But so who's to say it would be able to communicate with us? I mean, yeah, it's able to imitate organisms perfectly and behave like them perfectly, but that doesn't mean that it's sort of conscious and aware of itself. One of the speculations about the nature of the thing creature was that it imitates organisms so perfectly that even it itself is not aware that it is an imitation. It hides so well within the imitation that it's almost like its own consciousness is locked out of it, and it only emerges or becomes, active, as it were, if it's threatened in some way. So it sort of has that instinctive survival awareness just under the surface, but the actual consciousness is that of the imitation, thus, allowing it to hide even more effectively. They explore that a little bit in the comic books, actually, where the comic books, it actually continues on from the end of the movie, where it's actually MacReady. He gets picked up by a rescue team and stuff. And there's a few instances in the comics where MacReady repeatedly undergoes blood tests because he doesn't know if he's infected, and part of that was, and they talk about this in John Carpenter and Kurt Russell talk about this in the commentary, how they talked a lot about the nature of the thing and speculated about it. It was such an interesting creature with so many different interpretations to it. They said, like, if you were taken over, would you even know? Or would it imitate you so perfectly that you would believe that you were still you? And would it retain your consciousness, or would it just be a perfect copy of it so that you think you're you, but it's not really you? you know? So in the comic, they go into that a little bit, where MacReady's undergoing blood tests, and he's just like, he's scared because he doesn't know if he's been infected or not. So that was that. I guess that really is the core of it. Is the original has this wonderful sense of tension and paranoia, where you don't know who is a thing and who isn't. And when the thing emerges, it's scary because it's not fast and feral and jumping all over the place and whipping people with tentacles and dragging people down the hallway. Well, except that one case where the Blair creature drags the guy by his face. But that's, again, slow moving. It doesn't need to be fast because it's such a powerful creature, and it can infect you completely with just like a couple of cells. That's all it needs. Just something, squirt some goo into your nostril, and it's got you, or just bleed on you a little bit. It's got you, anything. So that made it scary. It didn't need to have all this elaborate thing. And speaking of the effects, I got to say this. I was really excited when I heard that they were going to use a lot of practical effects in the prequel, because one of the big things that the 1982 version is famous for is its practical effects. Just fantastic creature effects primarily by Rob Bottin, but also some work by Stan Winston. Like, for example, the dog creature was one of the big ones that Stan did. And just some fantastic work. And it's really been like the shining example of just how good practical effects can be. Like for creature effects and whatnot, and really holds up well to this day, just because the effects were A, so well done, and B, just so bloody imaginative and just amazing. So I was really excited when I heard they're gonna push a lot of practical effects in the new one, because that's one of the big things that people have always liked about the thing, was that it's just fantastic creature effects. And if you look at the extras, there's a lot of stuff about the practical effects that they created in it. And most of the practical effects are still in the movie. Well, some of them are. But there's some others. For example, the creature that later becomes half of Splitface was a practical effect. And you can see it in the extras. But in the final, mix of the movie, they erased the practical effects almost completely with CG versions of them. Like, what the fuck? And the thing is, in the commentary, they talk about why they did that. They said, we went more CG than practical for time constraint reasons. Because, in the original, they had way more time to do the original. They had like a whole year in production, and they they went and built the set on the location in the spring and then let it snow in and came back 6 months later and filmed. And the whole time Rob Bottin was making creature effects and stuff. And they say, oh, we just didn't have enough time. But and at first you think, oh, okay, that makes sense. So they just did it, to save time, and And at first I was thinking like, yeah, that's kind of typical of Hollywood now. It's like they're demanding so much more of their movie productions, and want them to just crank them out fast and make lots of money. But then I got to thinking about it, and as I sort of poured through the rest of the extras, I thought, you know what, that argument doesn't actually make any sense in this case. I mean, yeah. In the vast majority of cases, I can see that being the case, that they went with CG as a time saver, because the studios just don't allow as much time for productions nowadays. Well, with some exceptions, but for a lot of them, they don't. But with the prequel, it's like the practical effects were done. They hired a company called ADI, which has done a lot of great stuff. They did all the worm effects in Tremors, and what the hell else did they do? I don't know. They've done a bunch of creature effects anyway. I'm sure if you look them up on IMDb, you'll be able to find a whole bunch of movies that you recognize that they did the creature effects for. So they did some great work. I mean, if you look in the extras, they did some fantastic creatures, some really cool designs, easily worthy of the original, and a lot of them were nice throwbacks to the original as well. You see elements of them in there. But then they just erased them with CG. And I was thinking, like, well, okay, if you did the CG to save time, why did you do both practical effects and CG? That doesn't make sense. That makes no sense. You made more work for yourself in the limited time that you had. I mean, the practical effects were practically done. Little bit of polish. I mean, I can understand a little bit of CG enhancement or what have you, and in some cases they did that. They kept like part of the practical effect and added some enhancement, but in a lot of cases they just completely erased the practical effect that was done. Beautiful animatronic physical creatures that they had interacting with the actors, and replaced them with CG versions, which quite frankly looked pretty shitty. I really was not impressed with the CG at all. I mean, you could instantly tell when it was CG versus when it was a practical effect. Why did the practical effects work so good in the original? Because they were there on the set, interacting with the actors. They had the physical presence, the lighting matched perfectly because they were there on the set. They were all slimy and gooey and visceral and physical and gross and just fantastic. And they could have had that in this one, too, but they didn't. Because they chose to, it's not quite as good, and blah, blah, blah. Whatever their reason was, let's just gloss it over the CG. In, like, the very limited time they had left. If they'd had more time, sure, they probably could have polished up the CG better and it would have looked better. But, if you have limited time, go with one or the other from the moment go. Don't, go one way through most of the production and then change your mind at the last minute and do a shitty CG cover-up job to fix it. One thing I did like, which I forgot to mention, I should have mentioned earlier, fans of the original will recognize a lot of the staging and camera shots in the prequel. For example, there's a shot when they're looking at the ice block that they brought back, which contains the thing creature, and they're looking at the ice block, and just 1 second here, and the camera kind of goes down the hallway and over the railing down to the ice block. That is exactly the same shot that we see in the original when the Doc is going down the hallway and then sees Kurt Russell looking at the opened ice block, where the thing was carved out. So that was kind of interesting to see. And there's a bunch of little moments like that where they match shots and match moments. But honestly, for all the homage that those little moments were intended to be, it works way better in the original. And I'm not just saying that blinded by nostalgia. I am dead serious. You watch this one, and then you watch the original, and you tell me that those shots don't work better, those moments don't work better in the original. Tell me that you don't care more about the characters in this than you care about any of the characters. I don't even remember half the characters' names in this because they made no impression on me. They made no impact on me. You know, these characters were interesting and had history and had, you know, character to them. They were believable. They were a bunch of guys out fighting monsters in the Antarctica, and it was believable. Here, some of the actors, I mean, it's a great bunch of actors, there's no question. I just think that the material they were given was kind of thin. But but yeah, I guess to sum up, the things that bothered me most about it was, like, in some respects things matched up well, in other respects they didn't. The big two being the unearthing of the spaceship and the origins of Splitface, which I just do not think jive with what we all interpreted as all these years. And I think that with the clues that we are given in the original as to what happened in the Norwegian base, they really could have done a better job of it. You know, there was no reason to change the things they did, and they really could have constructed a better framework around those clues. And I don't know, I got the feeling it was kind of a rush job, despite having 30 years to be prepared for it. I don't know. Is it a bad movie? No. I mean, well, as far as the recent spate of remakes and prequels and sequels go, I honestly do think it's one of the better ones, at least as far as watchability goes. But and I mean, I'll certainly watch it again because I mean, there's enough little good moments in there that the fanboy in me enjoyed, that I'll just kind of overlook the things that pissed me off. I mean, I'm just kind of happy to have another chapter in the saga of The Thing, you know, something that adds in some way to the mythos. I just wish that they'd put more effort into actually keeping it consistent. I mean, it really wouldn't have been difficult to do that. Yeah. Anyway, I've been talking for almost 45 minutes. Well, never let it be said that I'm not thorough. Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. My thoughts on the 2011 version prequel of The Thing. Yep. That is it from me to you for now. So until next time, thanks for watching, and sayonara.